Washington, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has promised to continue unwavering support for Ukraine after Monday's missile strikes. "I just spoke with Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba to reiterate U.S. support for Ukraine following the Kremlin's horrific strikes this morning," Blinken wrote in a tweet. "We will continue to provide unwavering economic, humanitarian, and security assistance so Ukraine can defend itself and take care of its people." NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg also spoke to Kuleba Monday. In a tweet, Stoltenberg said that condemned Russia's horrific and indiscriminate attacks on civilian infrastructure in Ukraine. He affirmed that NATO will continue supporting the brave Ukrainian people to fight back against the Kremlin's aggression for as long as it takes. War crime, industrial-scale destruction of Ukraine culture. Indian minister says Ukraine war serves no one's interests. Singer driven from Belarus for speaking out tries to rebuild. Kyiv, Ukraine. A second round of air raid sirens rang across Kyiv on Monday afternoon, sending many across the city back underground into shelters following missile strikes earlier in the day. Missile strikes across Ukraine on Monday morning marked the biggest and most widespread Russian attacks in months. Andriy Yermak, a senior advisor to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, said a Russian missile had hit a playground in downtown Kyiv and another struck a central building of a local university. He said there was no practical military sense in the strikes, maintaining that Russia's goal was to cause a humanitarian catastrophe. Explosions have been reported in Kryvyi Rih, a city in Ukraine's central Dnipropetrovsk region, that came under attack for a second time Monday. City Governor Alexander Vilkel said the city was attacked by Iranian-built Shahed-136 drones. London, British Prime Minister Liz Truss says Russia's missile strikes across Ukraine are a sign of Ukrainian success and Russian President Vladimir Putin's increasing desperation. Truss spoke to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky Monday. "The UK stands wholeheartedly behind President Zelensky and Ukraine. Putin's destructive rhetoric and behavior will not diminish our resolve," the Prime Minister's office said. Britain said Group of 7 leaders would re-emphasize the unity of opposition to Putin's despicable campaign when they hold a virtual meeting with Zelensky on Tuesday. Geneva, the International Committee of the Red Cross, which has about 700 staffers in Ukraine, said it had momentarily paused movements in the country. Given the security situation in Ukraine earlier today, ICRC teams momentarily paused movements and sheltered and continued to work in place, spokesman Jason Strazioso said. The ICRC's full schedule of humanitarian assistance will resume immediately as the security situation allows. "We are monitoring humanitarian needs to provide assistance as necessary." Dnipro, Ukraine. Several strikes on the central city of Dnipro on Monday killed 4 people and injured 19, local officials said. They also partially destroyed a telecommunications building and left a city bus charred and mangled beside a large smoldering crater in the street. Bystanders said a rocket hit the telecommunications building in the western end of the city while another missed the target, landing just in front of a bus during morning rush hour. Despite heavy damage to the bus, officials said no passengers had been killed. The blasts broke windows out of residential buildings several hundred feet away and brought down power lines. The Dnipropetrovsk Regional Administration said 18 Russian rockets were fired at the region, 5 of which were taken down by air defense. Mathematician Natalia Nesterenko saw a missile fly by her balcony as she was working in her kitchen before hearing 2 explosions. "How can it happen with impunity that rockets are flying over civilian cities and buildings, and everyone is just watching? I don't understand why it can't be stopped," she said. "Please close the sky over Ukraine." In an industrial area in the south of the city, Associated Press journalists saw at least 3 bodies covered with blankets near where a strike hit what appeared to be a commercial building. Brussels, the European Union joined an international chorus of criticism and condemnation following the Russian missile attacks across Ukraine early Monday. Russia once again has shown to the world what it stands for. "It is terror and brutality," said EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. "I know Ukrainians will not be intimidated. And Ukrainians know that we will stand by your side, their side as long as it takes." EU Justice Commissioner Didier Reynders had to be rushed to an underground shelter as he was visiting the Ukraine capital Kyiv to assess evidence of possible war crimes with local officials. EU Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell said such acts have no place in the 21st century. European Parliament President Roberta Metsola called the attacks sickening. It shows the world, again, the regime we are faced with, one that targets indiscriminately. One that rains terror and death down on children. Moscow. Russian war bloggers and political commentators lauded Monday's attacks but argued that the strikes on energy infrastructure should incur lasting damage to Ukraine. The hawkish Kremlin-backed leader of Chechnya, Ramzan Kadyrov, who has long pushed for ramping up strikes on Ukraine, said he is now 100% happy. He taunted Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, saying, "We warned you that Russia hasn't even started it in earnest." Margarita Simonyan, the head of the state-funded RT television, cheered the strikes on her messaging app channel and said Ukraine had crossed a red line that by attacking the bridge to Crimea. Andrei Kots, a war correspondent for Komsomolskaya Pravda, the top Russian tabloid, voiced hope that Monday's strikes were a new mode of action to the entire depth of the Ukrainian state until it loses its capacity to function. It was just one massive attack on Ukraine's infrastructure, noted Sergei Markov, a pro-Kremlin Moscow-based political analyst. The Russian public wants massive attacks and the full destruction of the infrastructure that could be used by the Ukrainian army. Tallinn, Estonia. Several thousand Russian troops will be stationed in Belarus, Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko announced Monday. Speaking at a meeting with defense and security officials, Lukashenko said Belarus will host the Russian soldiers. He did not give a specific number, but said they would not number a mere 1,000. Be prepared to take in these people in the nearest future and place them where necessary, in accordance to our plan, Lukashenko told them. Russia used the territory of Belarus as a staging ground to send troops into Ukraine. Moscow and Minsk have maintained close economic and military ties. Ukrainian military analysts worry that the Belarusian military could invade Ukraine from the north in order to draw Kyiv's forces from the east and south. Moscow. A top Russian official said Monday that Moscow will try to oust Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's government. Dmitry Medvedev, deputy head of Russia's Security Council chaired by President Vladimir Putin, said that Russia, along with protecting its people and borders, should aim for the complete dismantling of Ukraine's political regime. He alleged that the Ukrainian state in its current configuration with the Nazi political regime will continue to pose a permanent, direct, and clear threat to Russia. Russia has repeatedly sought to cast the government of the Ukrainian president, who is Jewish, of Nazi inclinations, claims which have been mocked by Ukraine and its allies. Moscow. Russia's defense ministry said that strikes waged against Ukraine on Monday hit all the designated targets. The ministry spokesman, Lieutenant General Igor Konashenkov, said the Russian military launched massive strikes on military command and communication facilities and energy infrastructure of Ukraine. The goals behind the strikes have been fulfilled, all the designated facilities have been struck, he said. Konashenkov didn't offer any details, and his statement couldn't be independently confirmed. Berlin. Germany has condemned a barrage of Russian strikes on Ukrainian cities and promised help in repairing damage to civilian infrastructure. Chancellor Olaf Scholz's spokesman, Stefan Hebestreit, said the German leader assured Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky of the solidarity of the Group of 7 industrial powers in a phone call on Monday. He said that Germany will do everything to mobilize additional help and, in particular, to help with the repair and rebuilding of damaged and destroyed civilian infrastructure, for example electricity and heating supplies. Germany currently chairs the G7. Hebestreit said the group's leaders will hold a video conference Tuesday on the situation, which Zelensky will join. Germany said in June that it would provide Iris-T air defense systems to Ukraine. Defense Minister Christine Lambrecht said Monday that the first of 4 systems will be ready in the coming days. She said Monday's attacks underlined the importance of the quick delivery of air defense systems. Moscow. Russian President Vladimir Putin said that a series of strikes Monday across Ukraine came in retaliation against the Ukrainian attack on a bridge to Crimea and other attacks in Russia that he described as terrorist actions. Putin said the Russian military launched precision weapons from the air, sea, and ground to target key energy and military command facilities. He warned that if Ukraine continues to mount terrorist attacks on Russia, Moscow's response will be tough and proportionate to the level of threats. The intense, hours-long attack marked a sudden military escalation by Moscow. It came a day after Putin called the explosion Saturday on the huge bridge connecting Russia to its annexed territory of Crimea a terrorist act masterminded by Ukrainian special services. The missile strikes across Ukraine marked the biggest and most widespread Russian attacks in months. Putin, whose partial mobilization order earlier this month triggered an exodus of hundreds of thousands of men of fighting age from Russia, stopped short of declaring martial law or a counter-terrorist operation as many expected. Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko said he and Russian President Vladimir Putin agreed to create a joint regional grouping of troops, but offered no details as to where or when such a grouping might be deployed. Lukashenko's statement follows his repeated claims that Ukraine is plotting an attack on Belarus. At a meeting with military and security officials on Monday, the Belarusian leader reiterated that carrying out strikes on the territory of Belarus is not just being discussed, it is being planned in Ukraine. Lukashenko added that the Belarusian government was warned through unofficial channels about the alleged plans to attack. In more than 7 months since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, there has been no indication that Kyiv's forces are planning an attack on Belarus. Moldova's deputy prime minister says 3 cruise missiles launched Monday morning from Russian ships in the Black Sea on Ukraine crossed Moldova's airspace. Nicu Popescu, who is also the Minister of Foreign Affairs and European Integration, said he had summoned the Russian ambassador for an explanation. Moldova's defense ministry said the 3 missiles crossed over the northern part of the country, and that they posed a danger to the infrastructure of Moldova, and, in particular, to civil aircraft flying over the country's airspace. Moldova, a former Soviet republic which shares a border with Ukraine to the south, has been a strong supporter of Ukraine during the war. Russian troops have occupied its breakaway Transnistria region since 1991, when the region fought a brief war for independence from Moldova with Moscow's support. Kyiv, Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Russian forces launched dozens of missiles and Iranian-built drones against Ukraine. They want panic and chaos. They want to destroy our energy system, Zelensky said in a video address on Telegram. He also said that Russia is trying to destroy us and wipe us off the face of the earth. The General Staff of the Ukraine Armed Forces said 75 missiles were fired against Ukrainian targets, with 41 of them neutralized by air defenses. Zelensky said that the attacks Monday morning were clearly timed to inflict the most damage. Kyiv, Ukraine. At least 8 people were killed and 24 were injured in one of the strikes in Kyiv, said Rostislav Smirnov, an advisor to the Ukrainian Ministry of Internal Affairs. Explosions on Monday rocked multiple cities across Ukraine, including missile strikes on the capital Kyiv for the first time in months. The attacks came hours after Russian President Vladimir Putin called a Saturday explosion on the huge bridge connecting Russia to its annexed territory of Crimea a terrorist act masterminded by Ukrainian special services. Dnipro, Ukraine. A telecommunications building was hit in the central city of Dnipro, one of several strikes that caused at least 3 deaths. Bystanders said that 2 rockets hit the building in the western end of the city. A heavily damaged bus could be seen on the street in front of the building, which was strewn with rubble and broken glass. Oleksandr Shuklin, a construction worker who was working on a site just adjacent to the strike, said he'd seen 1 person who had died and another that was taken away by ambulance with injuries. He said he believed the strikes across Ukraine on Monday were Russian retaliation for the explosion on the Kerch Bridge on Saturday. Kyiv, Ukraine. Kyiv Mayor Vitaly Klitschko says that there are casualties and damage to several objects of critical infrastructure as a result of strikes on the Ukrainian capital on Monday. The strikes on Kyiv injured several residents who were seen on the streets with blood on their clothes and hands. A young man wearing a blue jacket was sitting on the ground as a medic wrapped a bandage around his head. A woman with bandages wrapped around her head had blood all over the front of her blouse. Several cars were also damaged or completely destroyed. Kharkiv, Ukraine. The eastern city of Kharkiv was struck multiple times Monday morning, knocking out power in parts of the city. Mayor Ihor Terekov said that the energy infrastructure building was hit. There is no electricity and water in some of the districts of the city. The strikes come 2 days after a series of explosions rocked the city on Saturday, sending towering plumes of illuminated smoke into the sky and triggering a series of secondary explosions. Kyiv, Ukraine. Multiple explosions rocked Kyiv early Monday following months of relative calm in the Ukrainian capital as other cities across Ukraine also came under attack. Kyiv Mayor Vitaly Klitschko reported explosions in the city's Shevchenko district, a large area in the center of Kyiv that includes the historic Old Town as well as several government offices. Lesia Vasilenko, a member of Ukraine's parliament, posted a photo on Twitter showing that at least one explosion occurred near the main building of the Kyiv National University in central Kyiv. The spokesperson for emergency service in Kyiv told the AP that there are killed and wounded people. Rescuers are now working in different locations, said Svetlana Vodolaga. Ukrainian media reported explosions in a number of other locations, including the western city of Lviv that has been a refuge for many people fleeing the fighting in the east, as well as Ternopil, Khmelnytsky, Zhytomyr and Kropivnitsky.